By the time they finally arrived, night had nearly fallen, and the cabin stood in eerie solitude at the center of a vast clearing. The structure was sturdy, built of thick logs, with a sloped roof weighed down by heavy layers of snow. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the encroaching wilderness behind them. The only sign of life was the frozen lake nearby, its surface an expanse of glassy ice stretching toward the tree line, untouched by footprints. The whole place felt untouched by time, as though it had been waiting for them. They stepped out of the SUV, the silence pressing in around them. No distant hum of traffic. No rustling of leaves. Just the faint whisper of the wind skimming across the snow. The air was biting, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant promise of another snowfall. Each breath formed a fragile cloud in the cold air, lingering for just a moment before vanishing into the darkness. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then, one of them chuckled nervously. "Well," Jake said, slamming the car door shut. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere." Erin rolled her eyes and adjusted the strap of her backpack. "You sound like we're in a horror movie." "You have to admit," Sam added, glancing toward the dense tree line, "it's got the perfect setup for one." Cassie, ever the optimist, grinned. "Or it's the perfect setup for a much-needed getaway. Come on, let's at least see if the inside is as creepy as the outside." Leo, the quietest of the group, shifted his weight and glanced toward Mason, who had been unusually silent during the drive. "You good?" he asked under his breath. Mason blinked, as if shaken from a thought. "Yeah," he muttered. "Just tired." They all were, but there was something about Mason's tone that made Leo uneasy. Still, he let it go, grabbing one of the heavier bags from the trunk. The others followed suit, each hauling their belongings toward the cabin with stiff fingers and quickened steps to escape the cold. The group had always worked well together, most of the time. They had been friends for years, bound by shared experiences and late nights, but the cracks in their relationships were still there, hidden beneath layers of laughter and nostalgia. Jake and Erin, once inseparable, now carried a tension neither wanted to acknowledge. Jake, with his easy charm and reckless confidence, had always been the life of the group. But lately, his jokes felt forced, his laughter a little too loud, as if he were trying to prove something. Erin, fiercely independent and pragmatic, had once thrived on their dynamic, but something had changed. She wasn't as quick to banter back, wasn't as willing to brush things off. Maybe it was the way he had started pulling away first, or maybe she was just tired of pretending nothing had shifted between them. Sometimes, she caught herself watching him too long, waiting for a sign of the person he used to be. Cassie and Sam, the heart of the group, were the glue that held them together. Cassie had a way of diffusing tension with a well-timed joke or a reassuring smile, and Sam, with his unwavering patience, kept things balanced. They had been dating for years, but even their steady relationship wasn't immune to strain. Cassie had been bringing up the future more often, hinting at the kind of conversations Sam wasn't ready to have. And Sam, ever the peacemaker, had been avoiding them altogether. He thought love should be simple, effortless. But Cassie wanted more, and deep down, he feared he might not be able to give it to her. Mason had grown distant over the past year. Once the most grounded of them all, something had shifted in him. He spoke less, smiled less, and when he did, it never quite reached his eyes. The others noticed but never pressed. They told themselves he would open up when he was ready, but deep down, Leo wondered if they were just too afraid of what he might say. Sometimes, Mason would glance at his phone, typing out messages he never sent, his expression unreadable. There was a weight in his posture, a quiet burden none of them had dared to name. Leo had always been the observer, the quiet one who saw what others missed. He wasn't as bold as Jake, as warm as Cassie, or as steady as Sam, but he understood people. And right now, as they stood before the looming cabin, he could feel it, a weight pressing on all of them. Unspoken words, unresolved tensions, secrets no one was ready to face. It had been too long since they had last spent real time together, and now, in the isolated silence of the woods, everything they had left unsaid felt closer than ever. As they made their way toward the cabin, the snow crunching beneath their boots, a feeling settled over them, one none of them wanted to voice. This trip might not be what they had expected. Inside, the cabin was just as still, just as cold. The fireplace was dark, the furniture covered in a fine layer of dust. The wooden floor creaked beneath their weight as they moved through the space, each of them glancing around with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The walls were lined with old hunting trophies, their glass eyes gleaming in the dim light of their flashlights. The air smelled of aged wood and something else, something faint, something they couldn't quite place. Day 1. The fire crackled, casting restless shadows against the cabin walls. Heat licked at their faces, but beyond the wooden barriers, the cold pressed in, heavy, watchful. Jake stretched out on the floor, arms folded behind his head, grinning like a kid with a trophy. "Told you guys I could do it," he said for the 3rd time. Erin, cross-legged by the fire, flicked a twig into the flames. Yeah. You're basically a wilderness god," she deadpanned, drawing a chuckle from Leo. Near the window, Sam traced idle shapes in the frost on the glass, his breath clouding the pain. "It's really quiet out here," he murmured. His voice, usually brash, was softer now. Like, too quiet. Mason tightened his blanket around himself. "I did hear something." His gaze flicked toward the door. Jake rolled onto his side, smirking. "Yeah, and I'm sure it was Bigfoot." Mason didn't laugh. "I'm serious." His voice was tighter now, strained. It sounded close. Leo's expression darkened. Unlike the others, he didn't completely dismiss Mason's unease. "What did it sound like?" Mason hesitated, his fingers gripping the fabric of his blanket. "I don't know. A low hum? Or breathing? But heavy. Just for a second." The room fell silent. Even Jake, ever the skeptic, sat up, though he masked his unease with an exaggerated yawn. The wind whined against the windows, making the old wood creak. "It's just the wind," Jake said, stretching. "Creepy trees. Weird noises. That's what happens when you leave civilization." Erin smirked, but Leo's eyes stayed on Mason. Sam, who usually dismissed anything remotely supernatural, hadn't looked away from the window. His fingers hovered near the glass as if expecting something to appear on the other side. Then, a soft thud. Everyone froze. Leo's breath caught. His gaze flicked to Mason, who was already staring back, eyes wide. Jake forced a scoff, but his bravado was thinner now. Could be snow falling off the roof. Another thud. Closer. Sam stepped away from the window so fast he nearly tripped over the rug. That wasn't snow. The cabin held its breath. The fire crackled. The wind whistled. Then, 3 deliberate knocks on the cabin door. Not the wind. Not settling wood. Not snow. Knuckles. No one moved. No one breathed. Outside, the trees whispered, their bare limbs rattling against the wind. But underneath it, something else. Something waiting. Night 1. No one answered the door. They waited, straining their ears against the silence, listening for footsteps, a voice, anything. But there was only the wind outside, the fire inside, and the oppressive weight of something unseen beyond the cabin walls. "It's gotta be some local messing with us," Jake said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Just ignore it." Mason shifted closer to the fire. "What if it's not?" Nobody had an answer. Eventually, they convinced themselves it was nothing. A falling branch, an echo in the woods. They locked the door, checked the windows, and turned in for the night. But sleep didn't come easily. Mason kept staring at the ceiling, ears straining for sounds beyond the wind. Sam lay stiff in his sleeping bag, every muscle locked, waiting for something else to happen. Even Jake, normally the first to pass out, tossed and turned, letting out irritated sighs every few minutes. Then, just past 3 in the morning, the sound returned. A slow, dragging scrape along the cabin wall. Sam sat bolt upright, heart hammering in his chest. The noise was steady, deliberate. Not the frantic scratching of an animal, but something else. Something testing the boundaries between them and the outside. It moved, shifting along the wall, closer to the door. Mason pulled his blanket over his head, breath shaking. Leo clenched his fists, eyes locked on the wooden planks of the ceiling as if he could see through them. Then, nothing. The sound stopped. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. No one dared to move. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows that made the walls seem to shift. And then, just as sleep began to take them, the whisper came. A voice. Right outside the door. Low. Almost unintelligible. But there. Murmuring something just beneath the wind.